Welcome back to the Shadow Journal. Tonight, I want you to look closely at a paradox. We are going to speak about a substance as white as snow, as fine as silk, and as cold as a grave. In the world of shadows, it is known by many names: the White Goddess, Blow, Snow, or simply the fuel of the elite. We aren't talking about a drug that puts you to sleep. We aren't looking at a molecule that dissolves reality like LSD, or one that numbs the soul like heroin. No. Tonight, we unseal the dossier on cocaine. This is the chemical of more. More energy, more confidence, more power, more greed. It is a substance that doesn't just change your mind. It hijacks your ambition. It is the only drug in history that has built entire cities from the ground up and then burnt them to the waterline. It has funded private armies, corrupted presidents, and turned brilliant scientists into desperate ghosts. But to understand how this white dust conquered the world, we must leave the neon lights of the modern city and travel back. Far back to the thin, frozen air of the Andes Mountains 4,000 years ago. Image high contrast botanical sketch of a coca leaf against a black void. For the Inca civilization, the coca leaf was not a drug. It was a bridge to the gods. It was a sacred gift from the Earth's mother, Pachamama. In the high altitudes where oxygen is scarce and labor is brutal, the leaf was a tool for survival. It suppressed hunger, eased pain, and gave messengers the strength to run hundreds of miles across stone peaks. They chewed the leaf in its natural state. It was a slow, gentle release of energy, a sacred ritual of endurance. To the Incas, the idea of addiction was non-existent. You cannot overdose on a leaf any more than you can overdose on a sunset. But then, the West arrived. And the West does not believe in the sacred. The West believes in extraction. In 1860, German chemist named Albert Niemann sat in his sterile laboratory in Göttingen. He had a crate of dried Peruvian leaves in front of him. He wasn't interested in the culture of the Andes. He wanted the essence. He wanted the active alkaloid. Using sulfuric acid and alcohol, he stripped away the leaf spirit and left behind a white, crystalline residue. He called it cocaine. He noted in his journal that it made his tongue feel numb. He didn't know it then, but he had just performed a dark alchemy. He had taken a sacred plant of life and turned it into a concentrated powder of death. Chunk. 2. The God molecule and the corporate rise. Niemann's discovery sparked a fire that spread across Europe. This white powder wasn't seen as a poison. It was seen as a miracle. Pharmaceutical giants like Merck and Parke-Davis began producing it on an industrial scale. They didn't see a tragedy, they saw a gold mine. In the late 19th century, cocaine was marketed as a cure for everything: toothaches, fatigue, and melancholy. It was in Vin Mariania, wine loved by popes. It was in tablets for children. And most famously, it was the original kick in a bubbling brown soda from Atlanta. The world was vibrating. But the first person to truly fall under its spell was the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. In 1884, Freud was a young, ambitious doctor in Vienna. But he was looking for a miracle to make his name. When he first tried cocaine, he felt born again. He described a state of lasting euphoria that felt better than any natural health. He wrote Über Coca, a song of praise to the drug. He gave it to his fiancée, his patients, and his best friend, Ernst von Flischl-Marxow, to cure a morphine addiction. Freud thought he had found the cure for all sorrows. He was wrong. He had only found a way to borrow happiness from tomorrow. At a 1,000% interest rate. Image high contrast portrait of Freud, half fading into white dust. Freud's friend didn't get better. He became the world's first documented cocaine psychotic. He felt imaginary insects, cocaine bugs crawling under his skin. He spent nights scratching his flesh until he bled, searching for parasites that didn't exist. Freud eventually realized the horror he had unleashed and stopped, but the world was already hooked. By the 1920s, the medical world recoiled. Laws were passed, and cocaine was pushed into the shadows. For decades, it was a boutique drug, the secret of jazz musicians and the decadent elite. But while the West looked away, the alchemists in South America were perfecting the harvest. Fast forward to the mid-1970s. The peace and love dream was dead. The world was entering an era of greed. And greed needed a fuel with a faster fuse. In the jungles of Colombia, a new empire was rising. They didn't wear lab coats. They wore camouflage. At the center was a car thief and tombstone smuggler named Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. He understood a fundamental truth. If you give the human brain a taste of heaven, it will crawl through hell to get back to it. Chunk 3. The Miami Snowstorm and the Birth of Crack. Imagine a silver jet flying through the midnight sky over the Florida Keys. No lights, no flight plan. Inside, 3 tons of high-grade white powder. This was the Miami Snowstorm. By 1980, Miami was a city transformed. It was a sun-drenched war zone. The banks were so full of drug money that the Federal Reserve had a cash surplus of $5 billion. Skyscrapers were built with white gold. The cocaine cowboys turned streets into slaughterhouses, machine guns in malls, bodies in trunks. Escobar didn't just sell a drug, he sold a monopoly on the human reward system. He had so much cash, he had to spend $2,500 a month just on rubber bands to hold the stacks together. He buried billions in the ground and lost 10% of it every year to rats eating the bills. He didn't care. The White Empire was producing money faster than the rats could eat. But the kings of Medellín were about to face a darker evolution. In the mid-80s, the chemists of the underworld realized cocaine was too expensive for the masses. They needed a way to sell to the street. By boiling powder cocaine with baking soda and water, they created a smokable rock. They called it crack. Crack was the ultimate capitalist nightmare. It was cheap, $5 a hit, but it was a biological weapon. While snorting powder took 15 minutes to peak, smoking crack hit the brain in 8 seconds. It was a chemical lightning strike. The high was more intense than anything humanly designed, but it only lasted 10 minutes. This short duration created the crash. The moment the high vanished, the user was plunged into a depression so deep they would do anything to get back to the peak. Inner cities became war zones of the spirit. The White Empire had found its infantry. Chunk 4. The anatomy of the hijack. Why does the brain surrender so easily? To understand the horror, we must look at the anatomy of the hijack. Inside your brain, there is a chemical called dopamine. It is the currency of pleasure. Usually, when you do something good, your brain releases it. And then a vacuum cleaner, a protein called the dopamine transporter, recycles it to keep the balance. Cocaine is the clog in that vacuum cleaner. Image, cinematic medical animation of a synapse being flooded with white light. It welds the transporter shut. The dopamine has nowhere to go. It piles up, hitting the receptors over and over like a hammer on a bell. For those 30 minutes, you are a god. You feel like you could stop a bullet with your teeth. But the brain is a delicate cathedral. It cannot survive a constant storm of electricity. To protect itself, the brain begins to downregulate. It destroys its own receptors. It dims the lights so the surge doesn't burn the house down. The result is anhedonia, the inability to feel joy. After the white goddess has visited you, the sun feels cold. Food tastes like ash. The touch of a loved one feels like static. The only thing that can make the brain feel normal is more white powder. The empire doesn't just take your money. It takes your biological ability to be happy. When an addict looks in the mirror, they don't see themselves. They see a hollow shell. Their eyes are dilated, not to see the world better, but because the darkness inside is trying to get out. Chunk 5. The Fall of the Kings and the Corporate Ghost. As the crack epidemic burned, the man who started it all, Pablo Escobar, was entering his own twilight. By the late 80s, he was a monster of his own making. He bombed airliners, assassinated candidates, and declared war on the state. He thought he was untouchable. But the White Empire is a jealous god. It consumes its own. The hunt for Escobar ended on a rooftop in Medellín on December 2, 1993. He died barefoot and alone. But the soldiers standing over his body didn't realize they hadn't killed the empire. They had only cut off one head of a hydra. Image: grainy 1990s footage of a fallen crown in the dirt. The death of Medellín gave rise to the Cali cartel, the Gentlemen of Cali. They were corporate. They didn't bomb planes. They bought banks. They realized the best way to hide a shadow is to place it under a bright, professional light. Today, the White Empire is a multi-billion-dollar ghost. It haunts the skyscrapers of London, the banks of Hong Kong, and the ports of Rotterdam. It is no longer about one man in a jungle. It is a pillar of the global shadow economy. It is the blood-stained ink in the ledger of global finance. Chunk 6. The Mirror of the Void. As we close this dossier, we are left staring into a mirror. Cocaine is the ultimate drug of the ego. It is the chemical expression of our desire to be powerful and untouchable. We live in a cocaine culture, addicted to the surge of information, status, and consumption. We invited this shadow in. The alchemists of the past didn't just find a drug, they found a key to the human defect. The desire to transcend the self without doing the work of the soul. Pablo Escobar is dead. But the God molecule is still here. It is in the bathrooms of powerful corporations and the veins of the desperate on-street corners. It is the silent thread connecting the laboratory to the morgue. There is a transcendent horror in realizing we have weaponized our own capacity for pleasure. We have turned the light of the brain against itself. Tonight, as the silence settles around you, listen to your own heart. It beats with a natural rhythm. It doesn't need a chemical fire to stay alive. The White Goddess promises you the sun, but she leaves you in the ice. Appreciate the stillness. Appreciate the fatigue. Appreciate the slow, honest path of being human. Because in the end, the Empire of the Shadow offers nothing but a hollow chest and a handful of dust. Sleep well, if you can find the peace. Guard your breath. Guard your soul. Good night, and until the next entry in the Shadow Journal.